Well, my history is that in 1975 to 1978 I served with the British Army. I did a short service commission with the Royal Artillery. 1978 I left the Army, as many of my peers were doing at the time, because we were looking for some real form of action. In 1978 we used to spend an awful lot of time on manoeuvres in Germany and that kind of thing, so the real kind of situations that today's servicemen find them in wasn't open to us in those days. So like many of my peers, I joined the Met Police, and I served with the Met for 21 years, from 1978 until 1999. Well, I left the Met in 1999 following a diagnosis with post-traumatic stress disorder. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD as a result of exposure to a number of incidents which started essentially in 1982, when I was one of the first officers to attend the Regent's Park bombing at the bandstand. Then in 1984, a good friend of mine, Yvonne Fletcher, was WPC at St James's Square outside the Libyan People's Bureau, when, as many people will recall, she was shot. I was a traffic officer in those days, and I was sent to escort her to hospital in an attempt to save her life, but obviously, as we well know, that was unsuccessful. Many years later I was involved in another bombing incident at the Baltic Exchange, and by that time I was an inspector at Stoke Newington in North London, and following that I suffered dreams and nightmares. That was followed by a panic attack which I mistook for a heart attack. I was placed sick, and I never went back to work. Eventually, as I was diagnosed with PTSD, I had some counselling, and I was very fortunate that counselling was undertaken by a very enlightened counsellor who had worked with combat stress, and she introduced me to a form of therapy that involved writing. The process of writing helped me in a therapeutic way, because what it did for me, I liken it to the defragmentation of a hard disk on a computer. That's the best way I've been able to come up with explaining with what the writing did for me in terms of improving my brain function. I was clearly depressed. My brain was not working in a way it did. And if you imagine that icon you see of a unfragmented computer, where all the little colours and dots are all over the place and everything is a bit messy, and the memory of the computer has difficulty accessing those points in a fluid and in a smooth way. What writing did for me was it did a defragmentation process, in that it got my thoughts in order. It disposed of things that I didn't need to be there. It put things to one side. It made things all in an area which was easily accessible. And I found that post-therapy, my judgment was better, my decision-making processes were better, my thoughts were better, my dreams, the unpleasant dreams I was having, they disappeared. I slept better. It was a process that worked for me. I fully recognise that it isn't a process that works for everyone, and I think, as people will well know, that PTSD is very much an individual thing, and you have to find your individual approach to solving your problems. The launch today of the Forces for Change campaign, I think, is fantastically exciting and encouraging. I don't know if an equivalent type programme is happening in England, and I hope for their sake that it is. It's very difficult when you're in an organisation that expects the very best of you to put your hands up and say that I am not well. It's difficult enough to put your hand up and say I'm physically unwell. To put your hand up and say that something is wrong with me mentally, it effectively means the end of your career. It's a sticker that's going to stay with you for the rest of your career. I think that needs to stop. I think it needs to be accepted that, like any form of illness, it can be fixed, it can be sorted, you can get better, and you can have a very good career following that time. Unfortunately, at the moment, it stays with you. And I think one of my biggest beefs is the fact that there are so many different organisations all over the United Kingdom, each doing their little bit. Many of them working in conflict with each other, many of them competing with each other even, and there's no real joined up approach. And I think if there's one thing I would like to see, it would be some form of overall coordination, so that there isn't organisations here, there and everywhere exploring what they think is a good way of addressing PTSD, for example, and they work with an umbrella organisation who could actually harness all that energy and effort being put in a more constructive way. In Wales, I think we're very, very fortunate that this is going to happen now. And just as I was talking about this kind of umbrella, joined up, coordinated approach to dealing with a specific problem that affects both the veterans and the blue light services, I think it's fantastic.